Yep.
Constantly do that. Oh, we should mute that. There we go.
All
All right.
Welcome to the podcast, everybody.
Welcome back.
Today is November 8th, 2018. T plus 2 days post-elections. You're getting a lot of podcasts this week.
Yeah, you are.
We're happy to report that we have a lot of podcasts this week.
Yeah.
So,
Making up for a lack of last week.
it's true. We just decided to give you double the amount.
Yep.
So we're going to take this time to kind of, now that the dust has settled a little bit, we've had some time to think
Catch up on
about
sleep.
Yeah, think about what we witnessed, and some of the results that we were waiting on at the end of Tuesday have slowly rolled in. We're still waiting on some, but some are in. We're going to talk to you about what the lay of the land looks like now, and, there has been no absence of news.
I was going to say, there's been a considerable amount of news,
Right.
considering that we've only had like a day.
We thought we were consumed by the
Yeah,
election,
Lord.
and then plot twist, all of these things happen.
So
So we're going to take some time to touch on all that. We're going to try to keep you informed, try to be a little bit entertaining, and we're going to be a lot more awake than we were on election night.
yeah. And a heck of a lot less depressed.
Oh, exactly.
Because, fam,
We got to stop.
we won.
We're going to stop. We're going to stop with this whole nonsense. We did a really good thing.
We did. We really did. And we're going to go into that today. And so to start things off, let's break it down.
Let's get into it.
Woo! To start things off in the Senate, with the biggest news probably,
Mm-hmm.
is the fact that one more Democratic seat was included, was decided yesterday
Mm-hmm.
when Don Tester
Yep.
pulled it out.
Yep.
Woo!
That was
So-
not supposed to happen, was it?
Well, it was.
Here's my question. How did Don Tester vote in the Kavanaugh hearings, do you know?
He voted against him.
Voted against him.
Yep.
That's right. So this whole narrative that people are trying to push, say, oh, all the Democratic senators in red states were punished because of the Kavanaugh votes. It's not true.
Not Don.
It's not true.
Especially because Trump hates Don Tester.
It's also true.
Oh, yeah. He really went after him.
And I mean, you go ahead. We have more examples of that being an exception, not the rule. But you can go ahead and talk about Don Tester while I pull up those names.
Yeah, no, I mean, Don Tester, Democrat from Montana, red state Democrat right there. Montana's a very rural state, not a lot of people. And so in many cases, it's a bit of an anomaly in the regard of having a Democratic senator.
Mhm.
But Montana has a history of going kind of back and forth in this regard. Rosendale was not an awful candidate. They don't know much about him. However, I know Trump pushed for him quite hard, mostly because Trump just really didn't like Don Tester.
What was the split at the end of the day?
It ended up coming down to a vote of 50.2% for Don Tester and a vote of 46.9%.
Dang.
So he won by basically 3 points.
Yeah. So to my point earlier, we had Senator Brown, Senator Baldwin, Senator Casey, and Senator Stabenow, as well as Senator Tester, who all voted against Kavanaugh, who were all in red states, who all kept their
Still
seats.
won.
So I think what this does is this begs the question of what happened to the Senate. Why did we lose the seats that we were expecting to do well in? Because the seats that we did lose, we lost by a pretty ugly margin. Granted, we came close. So why were we able to be successful in Montana and yet lose elsewhere? That's going to be something we're really going to have to examine coming out of this and getting ready for 2020. Why were we successful in places that we were, and why were we unprepared in the states that we lost pretty handily? So that's going to be something interesting to watch.
Yeah, there's some very interesting cases of like Montana and Minnesota, which Minnesota is a Democratic stronghold.
It's true.
However, the rural parts of Minnesota this time went overwhelmingly for Amy Klobuchar.
Mm-hmm.
So we finally got the name right, by the
Yep.
way, everyone.
Klobuchar.
Klobuchar.
Yeah, Klobuchar.
No. Yeah. So Amy Klobuchar won 60% of the vote. Like,
Yeah.
she killed it in Minnesota.
Let's talk about the other surprising results that we're actually still waiting on. What's going on in Florida? What
Right.
happened in
So
Florida?
this is big. So, unsurprisingly, Florida is going to have probably a recount.
Yeah.
Considering it's not fully in. There's only 99% of the vote in. Scott is leading 50.1% of the vote to Nelson's 49.9.
Bill Nelson, the Democratic incumbent, trailing closely
so
behind Rick
close.
Scott, who, to be fair, was expected to win pretty handily. So this is really surprising.
It's 15,000 votes.
Yeah.
That's it.
So before we get into how else Florida is pulling at our heartstrings right now, what's the final count? What's the count right now in the Senate? What's the split look like?
So it breaks it down currently because we're still also because Mississippi had a special election, so there was a projected runoff between Hyde-Smith and Epsy. Hyde-Smith got 1% more of the vote. However, if you break it down by party, Republicans got 55% compared to the Democrats, like 40.
Yeah, but that being said, it's worth noting they're going into a runoff because no one got 50% of the vote. There's 4 candidates.
Yeah, exactly. So that still has to come in, but that one's not looking terribly likely. Currently, there's 51 secure Republican seats to 46 secure Democrat seats. And that basically means that we're waiting on Arizona, we're waiting on Mississippi Special, we're waiting on Florida, and
I mean that's it.
Yeah, I don't know
are
why
the
I was
three.
looking for one more.
Yeah, no. The hesitation might be because Maine and Vermont both have independent senators. CNN went ahead and lumped those in with the Democrats just because Senator Sanders and Senator King both tend to vote with the Democrats. They tend to be pretty liberal on those issues. So at the end of the day, I mean, we're like Adam said, we're standing at a 51-46. It's entirely possible we could be standing at a 51-49. Though we lost Missouri, we could surprisingly pick up Florida, Mississippi, and Arizona. So lots of things to keep an eye on there. Kind of going forward, like I alluded to earlier, the governorships were also waiting on some results there. Most notably, we're waiting in Florida, in Georgia, 2 states that have gone to a recount. Big news, I think from today, maybe yesterday, Brian Kemp in Georgia announced that he was recusing himself from the recounts, which is through the Secretary of State's office.
Yeah, he's resigning as Secretary of State of Georgia.
Right.
So
the most effective way of recusal to resign.
Exactly. It's just simply, I was going to say, I can't believe I did this. So, okay, when you listen to the pod, you hear me praise Jefferson Davis Beauregard Sessions the third.
I can believe you did it.
Himself.
I told you not to do it.
I know. And then lo and behold, the man goes in and resigns.
Yep.
So yeah, Kemp is following. He's now deciding to follow the Sessions model and just resign.
Like I said, the most effective way to recuse yourself is just to resign.
Yeah. So.
Now, different scenarios those two gentlemen find themselves in, but Brian Kemp came out pretty early and said that he wasn't going to recuse himself, so it's good that he did. Stacey Abrams is going to fight tooth and nail to ensure that every vote is counted. We have a lot of evidence that votes were suppressed. I think they found a warehouse of I don't want to say 700. I think it was 70 voting machines that just weren't used. And we have plenty of evidence from polling places where there was just huge lines and 3 voting machines.
Yeah, that happened all over the state. We knew, and this comes down to just secretaries of states, for all different states all over the place, knowing that this election was going to muster large amounts of turnout potentially,
right?
Way more so than usual midterm elections. However, even then, you still had places run out of ballots, and you still had places that did not have enough functioning voter machines, and so, this one's on the states. And, while states are the ones that very proudly control their own elections, we need to have some kind of consistency. And I think that actually it's kind of weird, but one of the smartest ways to ensure that elections are free and fair is to have paper ballots. And not ones that you punch.
That's true. Yeah, no hanging chads.
Yeah, no, we're not dealing with that again, Florida. We're not doing that again. But having electric voting machines as compared to ballots that you physically fill out,
right?
The electronic voting machines are not nearly as reliable.
Right.
You see videos of people trying to click candidates and it just selects the other one.
Yeah.
You have to do it 10 times before it actually selects the one you want.
Yeah, there was a big issue in Texas this year where if you hit vote straight ballot, because you have to go through every page, if you hit straight ticket and then scroll through the pages, it would change some of your votes because the machine couldn't load fast enough.
Which is not okay.
Right.
So
it's
the best way to ensure that is to, just have paper ballots.
Mm-hmm.
So, anyways.
But I think the moral of that story is just we need to figure out some sort of effective oversight for our election system here because obviously it's too prone to mismanagement.
And we discussed this before where, with the Civil Voting Rights Act of 1965 ensured that, there were certain provisions that the South couldn't discriminate votes, but they couldn't
negated
Jim
Crow laws,
all of that stuff. And then, the ruling in 1991 overturned a lot of those things. And so I think that would really ensure that, these things didn't happen.
Yeah.
And then additionally on that, the last case that Justice Kennedy decided was in favor of states being able to purge voter rolls.
Yeah.
And that was a major issue we saw down in Georgia
Yeah.
and Ohio, which
Yeah.
both now have Republican
Well, tentatively.
Ohio now has a
Tentatively.
Republican governor, and Georgia's is currently in the lead.
Yeah. So again, we're still waiting on results from Georgia and from Florida. They could go either way. The House is the last big one. Now, okay, we ended the podcast. Our last segment in the last podcast, we started off kind of depressed. We were hemming and hawing a lot. We ended on a high note, but we started off hemming and hawing, which I think was
real
really
hype.
that initial hesitancy, I want to say, is pretty indicative of how Democrats kind of came out of the night. And I don't think that's right. I don't think that's appropriate, because where we're sitting right now with the House
Looks real good.
we're sitting 225 to 199. Again, the threshold to maintain to get back control was 218, and we're sitting at 225.
We passed that.
So not only do we have control of the House, but we picked up a few seats that we really weren't expecting to, in places that we really weren't expecting
And
to.
additionally, there are 11 seats that still have not been fully called.
Right.
And so there's a chance that most likely, Democrats will take a majority of that 11 seats.
Yeah.
So we're looking at, 230 potentially,
Right.
maybe over that even.
Right.
Things look really well for the Democrats, in the House.
Yeah.
And so this is our big victory, fam. We did it.
Yeah. We made some big moves
We
with
did
that.
it. Nationally, we finally now control part of the government again.
Yeah.
It's going to say we lost the judiciary like a month ago,
Mm-hmm.
and now come January, we did it.
One of the narratives coming out of election night, of course, Trump gave a pretty big presser the other day talking about, where we stand, announcing his victories, his personal victories and everything like that. But one of the interesting statistics I saw was that the House sweep that the Democrats got was actually, I think, one of the biggest losses that a president has had in the House in a midterm. And again, we keep talking about the electoral map that we faced and how difficult this was. I mean, these were some very, very gerrymandered districts we were able to retake. And again, in some surprising places. I'm going to use the example of the Senate again because, as previously mentioned, we picked up some Senate seats that we really weren't supposed to by common knowledge. And I think this is indicative of the change in the Democratic strategy, to where we went into 2016, we got our asses handed to us, and we kind of said, okay, we have to regroup and rethink. I don't know if there was a ton of calculation done in that, but we just saw individual Democratic candidates come out in these districts, put in the legwork. They were candidates that spoke to their constituents, and it helped them a lot at the polls, really. It's going to help lay the groundwork for what we're going to need in 2020. We picked up 37 seats. That is quite a considerable shift from and in the midterm year, especially considering the levels of voter turnout we got. Looking at what we did here, examining it, analyzing it, seeing if we can't replicate this strategy going into 2020, something that we really are going to need to spend a lot of time on. So, some food for thought for 2020.
Mm-hmm. And one last thing before we move off of what happened. There was something really significant that happened. That was a major victory for the people of Florida.
Mm-hmm.
Was there the Fourth Amendment on the ballot was an amendment that would restore the vote to people that have been convicted with a felony down in Florida. Because before this, basically, if you were convicted of a felony down in Florida, you automatically lost your right to vote.
Yeah, I mean, that's the case in a lot of states.
The process down in Florida was insanely difficult, even after you've gotten out, to get you that part restored.
Mm-hmm.
It basically came down to Rick Scott basically being the major deciding factor that didn't even have to give a reason. And John Oliver did a really good piece on this about whether or not you would get the right to vote back. And it was so little, such a small percentage of people that actually petitioned and went through this ridiculously difficult process to try and get their right to be enfranchised back. It didn't happen. And Tuesday night, Florida people, everyone from Florida voted, and it passed, and it restored the right to vote to 1.4 million Floridians. Yeah. And that is major.
That's absolutely insane.
Because if you consider in all of the past elections, we have barely lost Florida by, just a couple thousand votes.
Mhm.
And this restores, a large amount of, of support
Mm-hmm.
that, of, 1.4 million people that really don't like Rick Scott.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, this is true. And we saw similar ballot measures in Missouri that passed. We had the medical marijuana. We had the Clean Missouri. We had, I think the bingo ballot measure also passed. And there was one other one. Did the gas tax end up passing?
it did.
Yeah. So we had that. We had a couple different states pass some pretty good ballot initiatives with marijuana. I think Michigan or Minnesota, one or the other, passed recreational. Nebraska, I think, approved medical. And across the board, we had other ballot measures that really signified some of these progressive values that we saw the voters willing to go to the polls and turn out to the polls with pretty massive numbers with. This speaks to the overarching narrative that, we saw the Republicans hold on to a lot of their seats. We saw a lot of conservatives being reelected or winning some Democrat seats. Yet the same people that voted for those individuals also voted yes on a lot of these ballot measures. So where's that disconnect between people are willing to sign on to the ideology, but not necessarily the party or the individual? That's going to be a tough nut to crack. But, I mean, the people are willing to do it. People are willing to sign on to a lot of these things, and obviously the people want it. So, again, one of those head-scratching things that we're going to really have to look at going forward from here. So, any closing thoughts on election night?
We won, and let's not act like we didn't.
Yeah, that's true. Got to be happy about the victories we have going from here. So we'll take a quick break. We'll cover a little bit of the news, and we'll go from there.
We'll go from there.
Yeah.
Brett.
Yeah, Adam.
It's cold outside.
It really is.
Winter has come.
It is
just
truly.
like over the North Wall, just Game of Thrones style.
Oh, yep.
Just smacked us in the face.
Winter is here.
Winter is here.
Good old Kirksville.
And you know what that means, Brett?
What does that mean, Adam?
It means that you should keep your head warm
Okay.
with Avian Apparel.
What?
They have hats, Brett. And not just those usual beautiful baseball caps they have.
No.
They have stocking caps.
Ones that provide warmth.
With fuzzy little balls on the top.
That's what you need.
And it's a good-ass
And
time.
a little puff ball.
I love the puff balls.
Yep.
Yeah, so check them out.
Mm-hmm.
Go look at them. Go to
Mhm.
myavian.com.
Mm-hmm.
Go check them out on Instagram where you
Mhm.
can see me modeling it
That's true.
at,
My Avian Apparel, their Instagram account.
yep, and on Twitter.
And on
Do
Twitter.
it. Do it, fam.
Hey, Adam, if they go and do those things and check them out and want to purchase one of those cool, fashionable little puffball hats, what can we do to our listeners to kind of hook them up there?
Well, I feel
What can we
like
do?
our listeners, being the absolutely wonderful people they are,
Mm-hmm.
could go over myavian.com
Yeah.
and at checkout, use the code
Mm-hmm.
the36
Oh, my God.
at checkout for 15%
15% off. We're doing that for you, the listeners.
Yep.
We're going to hook you up. We're going to keep your head nice and toasty in this cold, cold time.
Oh,
and
yeah.
we're going to keep you fashionable
Honestly,
while
like,
doing it.
unbiased opinion, it was
Mhm.
one of the most cushioned and soft
Mhm.
and comforting things I
Mhm.
have ever placed my head in.
Oh, hands down. I'm
It
not
was
even a
wonderful.
hat guy. I have a gigantic head. Fit my head. Kept it nice and warm. And again, kept me looking fly. See, I like to have this nice coif to my hair.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't even decoif my hair, Adam.
Ah,
It kept
wow.
my hair perfectly
Guys,
coiffed.
Avian
and
Apparel,
warm.
quaffing hair,
Mm-hmm.
keeping it on the 100,
Mm-hmm.
keeping it on that 36.
Mm-hmm.
Go check them out.
Mhm.
myavian.com. Use the code the36. Keep your head warm.
Mm-hmm. Be fashionable.
Exactly. And while
Yep.
all the birds have taken flight south, you
You
are
can
that
stay looking fly. End of ed.
up north. All right. Ready to get into it?
Yeah.
Welcome back to the pod, everybody.
Welcome back.
So, getting into some news.
Yep.
First things first, we have to talk about our Lord and Savior, the notorious RBG. So a report came out this morning
Yep.
that Ruth Bader Ginsburg fell while she was at the Supreme Court
Mhm.
and fractured 4 of her ribs,
Mm-hmm.
which is a serious thing.
Yep.
Ruth Bader Ginsburg, despite looking fly as hell and being mentally sharp like a katana,
Mm-hmm.
she is 85.
Yep.
And with that, great power that comes with her age.
Great power that comes with her age and
Comes
knowledge.
a slight amount of cruelty.
Right.
So,
So that was one of the 2 horrible headlines to wake up to this morning. By all means, I think she'll be okay. She'll pull out of it. Obviously, again, when you're 85 years old, any trip to the hospital can be kind of bad. But this is a woman who works like a machine to keep her body as physically fit as her mind is sharp. So really, if a tragedy was going to befall anybody on the Supreme Court, I think it's least likely to knock out RBG, to be perfectly honest with you. But in times like this, we have to prepare for the worst case scenario. So let's say that, and fingers crossed that nothing traumatic or nothing tragic happens, but in the scenario that she can no longer perform her duties, that would mean that our one-term president gets to appoint a third Supreme Court justice.
I swear to
to
God,
the
Brett,
court.
if this happens,
Mhm.
I'm going to be so sad
Yep.
about our 100% accuracy rating on future predictions.
I've never wanted to be right less than in this moment.
This is one that I truly wish you are
Mhm.
significantly wrong.
Yeah.
Oh, God.
Yeah. And, I mean, let's not belittle what it means to take back the House, because now we get a lot of oversight. We get the chairmanships to a lot of committees back. However, presidential appointments go through the Senate.
That they do.
We don't share the Senate Judiciary Committee, which confirms them. In our best case scenario, we'll actually end up with the same makeup in the Senate that we had with the Brett Kavanaugh nominations. And this whole public sentiment that Democrats were punished for their no votes against Kavanaugh tells me that if we were to get to a point to where we're facing another Supreme Court nominee, odds are the president's going to get his way. Now, again, that's the worst case scenario.
Mm-hmm.
I fully believe that Ruth Bader Ginsburg is going to make a full recovery and be back.
She'll be fine.
I think she's going to come back to the court simply to spite the president.
I think that her entire existence is just to spite the Republican members of the Supreme Court.
Oh, surely.
Like that woman is like that is what gets her up in the morning.
Mhm.
That's what gets her to the gym every day.
Mhm.
That's what gets her pumped.
Mhm.
Because Ruth Bader Ginsburg is a phenomenal
Yep.
judge, a phenomenal woman.
The great dissenter.
She really is the great dissenter.
Mm-hmm.
And she will go down as one of the heroes of this really fucked up time in politics.
But I'm calling it. She's got another 10 years on the court.
Oh, yeah.
I'm going to call it right now.
I was
She's got
gonna
another
say,
decade.
Yeah,
The era of Ginsburg has not ceased.
it is.
It is not over. But again, something to keep an eye on. In other news, in other judicially related news, in direct response to how the midterms went, we had President Trump, among other things, announce the resignation of the Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, the other day.
Jefferson Davis Beauregard Sessions the
Mhm.
third.
So he was the Attorney General. Under him, we saw some pretty stereotypical conservative leadership of the top prosecuting department
I
in
think
the country.
A bit worse than usual. Jeff Sessions has some extremely retrospective views on, well, race,
Yeah.
marijuana, and basically anything dealing with minorities.
Yeah.
Jeff Sessions has a great history of being against anything that aids people that are marginalized in this
Yeah.
country.
Yeah, I don't know if there's going to be a defining characteristic of the Sessions era of the Justice Department. The big thing that people are upset about is, I think on like day one, when Sessions came into office, he recused himself from the Russia investigation because he was in the Senate when that started and felt that it would have been a conflict of interest for him to preside over that. That pretty much immediately pissed off the president, who was expecting to have an AG that was going to protect him from that.
Yep.
So this is not a surprise. His resignation, in air quotes, was the firing that we've been expecting now for quite some time.
Oh, yeah.
It happening right after the midterms. You can read into that what you want, but the moral of the story is whoever's going to be his replacement is most likely going to be very combative to the Mueller probe.
Yeah. So currently the acting Attorney General will be Matthew Whitaker.
Mm-hmm. Matt Whitaker was Jeff Sessions' chief of staff. He was a U.S. attorney from Iowa, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
Very conservative, very big Trump supporter from day one. Pretty much fits in line with everyone else in this cabinet of they were some early Trump supporters, and so they were rewarded with high positions. He's not expected to really do much with his time as the acting attorney general. I think we'll see someone's name put forward here pretty soon.
Yeah. So this is the time I'm going to go out on a limb.
Right.
Because I'm risking my 100% accuracy.
Yep.
Right before we started this, Brett asked me who I thought would be the next nominee.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's going to be Lindsey Graham.
Which would be an interesting maneuver.
I think that in recent times it has actually shown he has shown a complacency and like a willingness to blindly jump on board that Trump train.
Oh, he completely prostrated himself in front of the entire Judiciary Committee. No, he laid down in front of the committee and said, I'm going to be 100% for Trump. look at me, look at the theatrics I'm putting on.
Yeah.
I am Trump's number one guy. So, yeah, I mean, it wouldn't surprise me. I think it'd be a bold move. Wow, I would love
God.
to see Rudy Giuliani. as our
Currently,
next
currently
AG.
the BBC has four people that they think are possibly likely. Them being Rudy Giuliani,
Jesus Christ.
Pam Bondi, Lindsey Graham, and Chris Christie.
4 solid choices.
God.
Solid choices.
God. So for those, most people will know those names. Pam Bondi is Florida's first female attorney general. She's 52 and has been a longtime Trump friend who joined the lawsuit against the Obama administration all throughout her time down as the AG of Florida. And that's the very quick synopsis.
Yeah, I think with any 4 of these, Chris Christie, that one would actually kind of surprise me just because I don't think he's been such an avid and outspoken Trump supporter. I think they probably threw his name in the hat just because he's someone in the Republican Party we haven't heard of in a while, or heard from in a while, rather.
Yeah, and I don't really, really would like to imagine that, people that actually run the administration would not have Rudy Giuliani in that seat.
Rudy.
But
I would love that. Just
oh my
imagine.
God.
I mean, no matter how you dice it, whether it's one of those 4 or not.
Yeah, it's not going to be good. We know that.
Yeah, whoever it's going to be is going to be somebody who takes a very harsh stance against the Mueller probe. Granted, something that we get when we win the House, we have oversight of all of that. So no matter what the AG attempts to do, as long as we maintain our majority in the House, then we can make sure that the investigation continues
accordingly.
Yeah. All right, so we're going to take a little break, and we're going to come back with our full-blown election coverage. We primed you with a little bit at the beginning, but we're going to take a deep, deep, deep dive here after the break.
We should do an outro. Should I pause it? And I'm like...
All right, well, welcome back to the 36%. This is a special segment where we're going to do a deep dive into the 2018 election results, deep dive. I'm Brett, as per usual, but I'm joined by 2 good friends of mine today. They're the experts on the subject, so I'm going to let them introduce themselves. Shade and Daviana.
Hello.
How's it going?
I'll bump it up here first. I'm Shade.
Yeah, you got to give yourself a bunch of
to...
fancy titles.
Ooh,
Shade.
Yeah. I'm
What's your
a
title?
college graduate.
Ooh.
I'm well-versed in communication,
Yeah.
so hear me on this podcast.
President of the Young Democrats of Missouri.
Yeah, I do a little bit of Democratic stuff.
Yeah.
Bounce around. If
Yeah.
anybody's got a job they want to give me,
We're
this
not
is my plug.
Okay, you're just using this as a platform to get your resume
Girls
out there.
gotta do what
All
girls
right.
gotta do.
Daviana, what do you do?
Daviana,
Yeah.
Truman grad,
Yeah.
KU City Management Fellow.
Ooh.
Ooh. City Management, Local Government. Love it. What else do I do? I work at the League of Kansas Municipalities, so once again, hashtag local government. And also, job plug, if anybody needs an assistant too in their city, I like Arizona.
I like the city of Arizona. It's a really great city.
I like Arizona.
I've done a lot of
The
research.
city of Arizona.
So we're just going to have a little fast and loose discussion on the election. We're still waiting on a couple different results. We got Florida, Mississippi, Georgia, Nevada. We have a couple recounts we're still waiting on. I thought that maybe we'd be optimistic and have some of those results back in yet, but no go on that. What we do know, though, is from everything that we've gotten back so far is you can take the Democratic victory however you want to. You can be disappointed by how we did in the Senate. You can be disappointed by how we did in the governorships, but you really can't dispute the fact that we kicked some ass in the House. So as of Thursday, we had 101 women winning House seats, breaking the current session's record of 84. Knocked it out of the park on that one, really. And I think this is one of those things of like, we were watching a lot of the results roll in. I wasn't surprised because I feel like since 2016, we've seen special elections being dominated by female candidates at every level of government, not just the big name positions, but you know, I feel like this is going to be the new face of a lot of politics, is seeing women in these seats of powers. And again, to me, that seems normal, but I'm sure that seems a little, I don't know, a little alien to a lot of other people. What do you guys
I feel
think
like
about
people, and we're seeing a change in kind of demographic in the House, and it's getting there in the Senate. But I think this is just what happens when you see representation. Like a lot of these seats that women ran in and won, a lot of different women, they weren't seats that we've had a candidate like that before. And I think we can really chalk that up to, people can say we're turning a corner and being more progressive and we've got a new age on the horizon, but I really just think that's what happens when you get the opportunity to vote for someone like that, or get the opportunity to put someone different in one of these seats of power. And I think it's going to really change the tide of like what we see come out of the House. And it's going to be really good for a lot of Democrats, but I think it's just going to be good for our country overall. It gives people a different perspective to see how our bureaucracy can work or not.
So what was the difference this time? I mean, you talk about having the opportunity to vote for someone who's more representative of you. Obviously, that's is very attractive to a large base of voters. We know that women tend to vote much more consistently than men do across the board, regardless of party. Yeah, y'all show up at the polls much more than we do. So what was different in 2018? Why did we have so many more women on the ballot? Was there a more motivating factor behind it? Was this really direct referendum? We saw 2016 of like, okay, though Hillary Clinton didn't win, we see that obviously there's a platform for women. Or do we want to distance ourselves, say, okay, we can have female politicians that aren't Hillary Clinton?
Well, I don't know. I feel like myself included, I think a lot of women had just kind of been scooting by, and 2016 rolled around and we were like, hey, it's our girl Hillary. She's going to do this for us. And I think a lot of us were motivated to vote for her, work for her, volunteer, do what we could. But I don't think a lot of us had really imagined ourselves stepping into that role and saying, well, I need to do something. And we've seen like the Women's March, and it's a really fun, different time to see a lot of opportunity for girls and women to get involved. And I think a lot of us turned around after that loss and was like, oh, well, shit, like, I'm going to have to do something if nobody else is going to step up. And I think we just saw a lot of women do that.
I think when you kind of look at the Democratic failure, and I say that lightly, of like Hillary not being able to get the presidential election, that I think women are saying, or have said, or my perception of it is that, okay, if we can't get this big office for the next foreseeable future, where can we make change now? And the change is simply midterm elections. And there are a lot of seats available and a lot of seats open, especially for Democratic hold to take place. And so I think it's a lot more of, okay, we kind of drop the ball, so to speak, on this way. What other way can we make an impact that's just as significant without, having the presidential seat?
I think it's really important that we did that. And I think that after this, it's just seeing it actually happen and seeing them get elected. It's not such a foreign concept to a lot of us anymore.
No, I think that's great. I think a lot of this plays into, and I don't want to start talking about 2020 yet, although we did get over 2018. But there's some serious reconsideration and some soul searching we're going to have to do before we get there. Because again, we talked about the blue wave and how this was supposed to be such, I don't want to use the term easy, but this was supposed to be, this election was supposed to be handed to us in a lot of ways. Everyone's really upset with, the Republican Party in general and the president specifically. And yet we had a good turnout, but it wasn't as great as we were expecting. Again, we had a lot of seats that we really thought were going to tip our way that ended up not. And so what do we look at out of 2018 and say, okay, we need to reevaluate, we need to set a game plan going into 2020. We saw healthcare being the number one issue for this election. Maybe 2020, we really try to drive that home. I'm sure there's going to be a ton of other issues that pop up before then. But as far as presidential hopefuls, what would you guys like to see in 2020?
Oh.
I know, it's a loaded question. We're just gonna get into it. I mean, and this isn't necessarily an individual, but like, what would you like to see them focus on? I mean, what direction do you think the Democratic Party needs to take if we're gonna be successful?
I personally have been saying for a little while, I want someone from the Midwest to run.
Right.
I want someone that like can hang in New York, but is grown up in this area. I think we see a large voting base of people from the Midwest and more rural areas that are really pushing this and carrying a lot of elections and deciding things. And I think we need someone that can walk the walk when it comes to a lot of rural voters, because these people they are looking out for their best interests. There are a lot of single issue voters, but I think a good farm-grown Midwesterner needs to take that White House bag. And I want them to have a D next to their name.
Right. Davian, you have any thoughts on this?
I agree with like somebody who can be in a room full of people and be able to connect with people very easily and find those common threads and be able to work with that. And I think what's interesting about what Shay touching on the rural aspect is we need somebody that's rural. Is it from the Midwest? Maybe, you know, but just somebody who is able to touch those democratic bases that are in rural communities but are overshadowed because of traditionally rural areas being red and being Republican, because the fact of the matter is there are Democrats in rural areas, and if you're able to pull somebody from a rural area that has a D next to their name, I think that really changed the tide in 2020 and really show the impact of, okay, small towns have something to offer here, and whatever we thought in the past about rural America may not be true, and we need to delve deeper into this and really understand, you know, these people who have single issues and how do we appeal to them and how do we make sure that their voices are being heard.
Yeah, rural does not mean red.
Yeah.
No, and I think if nothing else, if
Right now it does.
well, even then, see, this has been my big sticking point is people, especially in Missouri, they're pointing at what ballot initiatives did we just pass? We got
Progressive ones.
yeah, exactly. We got the raise the minimum wage to $12. We got the approval of medicinal marijuana. We passed the Clean Missouri Act, which was a big ethics bill. So obviously, Missouri people, a vast majority, have these very progressive ideals. And then we saw what we saw happen, which was heartbreaking and tough to talk about. But Claire McCaskill got removed by.
He who shall not be named.
And it wasn't a huge margin, but it wasn't close enough to trigger a recount.
It was a bigger margin than I thought it was going to be.
Right. So how do we break through this? Obviously, people value progressive ideals. They value these progressive issues, and yet they still just can't stomach voting for a Democrat. How do we break through that?
Somehow we've got to really break it down to a lot of these voters that are these your issues? Are these your values? And then like, well, which candidate actually is the face of those values and those issues? And that connection is not getting made in the ballot box. I think it's getting distanced with these TV advertisements that are blatantly false, and a lot of the rhetoric that's going around, and fake news, like, God, I hate that term, but it's what it is.
Yeah.
It's falsehoods that are being spread with a lot of disregard that I don't understand. And we're going to have to figure out how to combat that. And I do not think we're doing a good job at that. And I think that is why we're losing votes and where we're losing seats. And especially with Claire's race, it was really confusing to tell the difference between those two candidates if you were a voter that pays attention but doesn't have time and resources to really dive in and fact check a lot of these things.
Yeah. Daviana, obviously we get to talk about the McCaskill race here a little bit. You've been in Kansas for the past couple of months now. What was your experience being there during the Laura Kelly, Chris Kobach challenge? How prevalent was it that race was happening? Did you have all these attack ads? Because, I mean, we were inundated with the Josh Hawley, Claire McCaskill ads here. What did that look like in Kansas?
It was interesting because I very rarely saw Laura Kelly and Chris Kobach ads on TV.
Right.
A lot of it was the Paul Davis thing.
Yeah.
And so in my opinion, I think that overshadowed everything else. And I think that what happened was people were content with the rhetoric that the Kobach campaign was running. And then they saw congruencies with Brownback and they said, okay, if Brownback made it, Chris Kobach is kind of like a sure win, no matter how you feel about it, either way on either side of the aisle. But especially for me, being a Democrat, I was kind of like, okay, Chris Kobach, that's going to be the governor. Now, what can we do to combat that?
Right.
So I think it was very much an underestimation and overconfidence of, okay, we are underestimating Laura Kelly and her campaign and the impacts that she's making on the ground, and we're overconfident in the fact that Chris Kobach is, I mean, he's very congruent with how Kansas is being viewed within the state and outside of the state, and just becoming content with that. And so it was very much a shock to wake up the next morning seeing that Laura Kelly was like the governor-elect. And
it was shocking to me.
And it was interesting that it wasn't advertised on television at the very least. Yeah. I mean, commuting from Lawrence to Topeka, I see all the huge ads that are in these farmyards and things like that. And, you know, that's the face recognition that I'm getting, other than tuning in onto the internet and watching television.
Yeah.
So it was strange, and to me it seems kind of backwards. Like what I expected to happen in Kansas, I expected to happen in Missouri, and vice versa.
Right.
So
And that's kind of why I want to just try to examine this, or like wrap my head around it a little bit, because I feel like what we used to accept as common sense just doesn't apply anymore. Because what I would have thought going into this is, okay, how does a Democrat win in a red state? I'm counting Missouri as a red state in this instance. And I would have said, okay, they need to be in touch with the people. They need to have that FaceTime. They really need to make an effort to make the people know that they have similar values to them. And hands down, Claire McCaskill does that over Josh Hawley 10 days a week. And yet we see the result there. You go to the flip side of that, and you go to Kansas, where we have very conservative values. I mean, yes, Democrats took back the governorship, but the state houses both got more conservative. But we didn't see a lot of this FaceTime going from district to district, talking with voters kind of stuff. I'm sure it happened, but I mean, Claire McCaskill is known for that. I didn't hear anything about either of the candidates, really. So again, I'm not expecting answers from this, but it really is just kind of mind-boggling to me. But what pieces do we have to even put together, like to make any sort of winning map going forward from here? What's the strategy? And I think a lot of it does start with from the top down. Actually, I think maybe even the bottom up, making sure that we have candidates that are representative of where they're from, that have the ability to connect with people. I think that's probably the biggest thing that we could do. And
I don't know, when I watched the results come in Kirksville, almost all of our Democrat to Republican candidates were about like a 70-30 breakdown.
okay,
On every single race we lost, that was about the margin. And it was, I just like watched it consistently happen, and I was like, I just didn't understand completely. I didn't expect us to carry some specific seats, but I didn't expect it to be that different. And I don't quite understand. I felt like I know a lot more people voted in this election. That's fact. But did we turn out more Republicans by talking about, I do think this whole idea of a blue wave really hurt us. And it was not something that I ever tried to play into at all, because that's just kind of the same mentality that we had in 2016 with Hillary. It was just go, 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 win, win, win.
Right.
Like, we have the coolest, some would argue, the greatest candidate for president ever, and it doesn't follow through. And you kind of saw a little bit of a reflection with that with Claire, and Claire's race is almost a little more hard to take apart and examine, because it wasn't just a woman versus a man. It was a senior senator versus a guy that has not been in public office for a very long time at all. And he did not travel across the state. He did not go talk to voters in the way that Claire did. And it's really hard to break down, but I think a lot of it can come back to, and I can't say this for certain, but a lot of our field operations, I do think Missouri needs to get stronger at organizing. And I think that's kind of where we fall short in that aspect, is we need to learn how to organize year round. It's not a seasonal sport.
right.
I think what really, going back to the Kansas thing and Laura Kelly being governor-elect, that I was just looking up that she kind of ditched the blue wave rhetoric, and I think that
100%.
helped her significantly, because she's essentially saying that this is not about Democrats versus Republicans as often it's framed. It's Democrats, Republicans, Independents, because we saw a lot of Independents, Libertarians on the ballot. And
Thank God for Greg Orman, am I right?
he made it farther than I imagined.
A lot of mixed emotions on Greg Orman.
So I think her ditching that rhetoric and really helped her. And I think when Claire came to Truman last spring, she kind of ditched that rhetoric as well, that it's very important to engage in bipartisan efforts. This shouldn't be a you versus me. Of course, there's some fundamental differences between various parties, but at the end of the day, you're elected to do a job that your constituents entrust and delegate for you to do.
Right.
So I'm not necessarily sure the disconnect with, like, what made it different with Laura Kelly ditching the blue wave versus Claire McCaskill ditching it? Like what? And ditching is
Maybe
kind of a harsh term, but it was very clear that bipartisan efforts
Yeah, I think they
priority.
they both ran as moderates. I mean, I would even say Laura Kelly takes a lot of flack for running as a conservative, but that is her sincerely held ideological beliefs. It elevated her to the Senate minority leader, and it elevated her to the governorship. So I don't know. It's a tough one. Coming up with a lot of answers.
I know,
here.
it's just like you have an answer, but then I have this follow-up question about what was the difference, and that's what it just comes down to is like what made it different.
Exactly.
I don't know.
Yeah, it makes
don't.
but I think it's good that we're having these kinds of conversations because these are head scratchers. But again, we need to be we need to reflect because obviously our common sense, common knowledge doesn't apply in 2018 or going forward anymore.
I need an out-of-body experience with someone of a different political view so I can start to comprehend kind of what is going on.
So I'm wondering the comprehension piece, which touched on earlier, is like single issue voters.
Yeah.
I think that definitely was the turning point about people who usually don't participate in elections. They knew that an issue that they cared about, for example, medical marijuana in Missouri. There are people
many people talk about
people
that.
are so passionate about that single issue, and we're really like, I really don't care about anything else, but this is a necessary thing that we need to, a necessary proposition that we have that we need to address.
Right.
And so how do we reach those another question, how do we reach those single issue voters?
Yeah.
And I think it goes back to the point of saying we need candidates and we need citizens to know the issues of these candidates and vote based on that, because just seeing all over social media the fact that Missouri is being so progressive about about the minimum wage and things like that, that Josh Hawley does not associate with. He's directly in opposition to. So how did that happen? And I think it goes to another point of the whole down with the establishment, because Josh Hawley is coming in a year and a half into his attorney general job and saying, just essentially an outsider, like, yes, I've been here a year, but I'm ready to make change on the federal level. And where Claire McCaskill has served for 12 years now as, I mean, that's not by any means a career politician to some extent, but she's been there for a long time, that people are kind of like, okay, she's now entrenched in the system and the bureaucracy. We need something different. And I think we saw that same rhetoric when Donald Trump was elected.
Yeah, I think it was a parallel race in that sense. It was really similar to that. And
political outsider versus established politician.
yeah, Josh Hawley's a young guy. He can wear a red hat and float around on his flatbed truck. But I just didn't understand his appeal to a lot of rural voters. And I really do think that this, as much as like I kind of put it in the back of my mind, I think the Kavanaugh vote played a big part with Claire, and it makes me wonder. I didn't want Claire to vote for Kavanaugh at all, and I was very relieved when she came out and didn't vote for him. But I think that's what ultimately did her in and did Heidi Heitkamp in was this Kavanaugh vote, and I think we really underestimated it, and we needed her to vote no. But I think that's a big reason why it was a lose-lose. That's a big reason why we lost her.
Yeah. It's one of those things of where you would like your politicians to behave morally, and I think voting no was the morally correct choice. Did it cost her a seat? I mean, Senator Stabenow kept her seat. She voted no she's Democrat in a red state. Don Tester up in Montana narrowly kept his seat. He also voted no. But, different states, different opinions on
different candidates.
Right. I think we're at a disadvantage because we're so far entrenched into the politics that it's difficult to get in the mind of a one-issue voter who
really
doesn't
is.
just mainline news into their arm 24/7 like we do. But, I mean, that's got to be the missing piece of the puzzle.
I think we need to start doing a better job as Democrats of like tying ourselves to issues and not being afraid of doing that. And the right issues.
Right.
Like, I feel like, I don't know, I feel like maybe if the Democratic Party, and I understand that you can't always do this, but like taking a stance like with medical marijuana, or really like we backed Clean Missouri really hard, and we backed the minimum wage, but I didn't see us doing anything with medical marijuana, and I just wonder why we are so hesitant to take that next step forward. We want to talk about being progressive in all these other ways. So why do we think that medical marijuana, which is medical, and that's why it's on the ballot to help people, is something that we need to stay away from? And I just think it's issues like that. Like, if we would just like step up and be like, I think we need to be a little more transparent sometimes, and really own our truths as a party. And because the Republicans don't have a problem with that.
Oh, no.
No matter how ridiculous or crazy or right wing it is, they own their stuff. And that's what people might not always, and that's what you hear out of their mouths. They might not always agree with the Republicans 100%, but they own it and they stand with it. And they're like, that's the kind of person. Because isn't that the kind of person that, if you're looking at like a friend group or someone that your boss or someone you trust or someone that is running things, you don't want someone that is timid. You want someone that is assertive, that is doing and is believing and acting in the way they say they're going to. And I think we need to do a way better job at that.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, the Republicans really don't have a lot of Republicans, politicians, candidates, and people in general don't really have a problem with aligning themselves with a lot of the radical conservative ideas. This notion of, build the wall, crazy immigrants coming in, all that kind of stuff. And we just kind of accept that of like, okay, that's the new Republican Party stance. We have progressives that come out as super progressive. The first thought is Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez in New York. When she came out, people go, she's a dirty socialist. And a lot of the Democratic Party distanced themselves from that because they had this fear of we need to run as moderates to get elected. And obviously that doesn't work. How many more times do we have to get beat before we let that sink in, that we need to be able to take stances and not moderate ourselves?
But did that actually happen? I push back on the concept that two things.
Yeah.
I think there is my opinion about the reason that Democrats didn't take a stance on medical marijuana in Missouri is the fact that they don't want to alienate their older generation of voters. The 1930s had a huge reefer madness era where it was essentially competition between tobacco and marijuana. And so in order for tobacco to happen, for tobacco to be backed, you have to have this kind of dirty concept of like, let's demonize marijuana.
Yeah.
And growing up, I can imagine in that time where it's just like marijuana is the worst drug that you can ever do, debatable. I think that Democrats didn't want to alienate their older voters who grew up in that time period where reefer madness was a thing. It's a movie. Check it out.
Oh, it is.
It's a movie.
Don't smoke the reefer, kids, but here, have a Coca-Cola, fresh cocaine in it.
Do anything else
confusing
but
time.
marijuana.
Right.
And so I think there's definitely a generational gap there. But what I'm seeing trend-wise, especially on the federal level, is that parties are becoming more polarized. And if you think of like a standard bell curve, that you have most of your moderates, of course, in the middle. And on the ends, you have your 2-3 standard deviations. And I think a lot of times we're seeing parties taking too polarized, too radical stances that you're forgetting moderate voters who waver on these single issues that could really impact the control that either party has. And I don't necessarily mean that to say that the entire party, either party or all the parties are being radical, but those radical stances are being publicized. And so you're seeing a lot of it. And I think, especially with regular consumption of media and irregular consumption of media, people are just hearing that there are the radical things happening that I feel like I'm being forgotten and that my vote doesn't matter.
That's a good point. And we do lose a lot of the common like dinner table issues when we start going to the limits of the political spectrum, the ideological spectrum. So goddamn, all of that, and we have no answers out of it. But again, it's good that we're having these conversations. So kind of to wrap things up here, obviously we still have a couple of races that haven't reported in, but right now we're sitting at 225 to 200 with the House, for a 25-person majority. We're getting the gavel back. We're getting all of our chairmanships back. So closing thoughts, because this is a contentious issue among Democrats, and I thought we could have some fun talking about it. Do we want Nancy Pelosi to be the speaker again?
Yeah.
Okay.
I stand behind her.
Daviana?
I don't have a problem with Nancy.
Okay. Shade,
good
give us
gal.
your reasoning.
I think that's a great example of Democrats needing to stand their ground. Nancy Pelosi has delivered on issues consistently. She does a great job. And I am really frustrated with this rhetoric. We cannot give in to the rhetoric that the Republicans are pushing about this anti-Nancy Pelosi, anti-Chuck Schumer bullshit. And she has delivered. You wouldn't fire someone for doing a bad job.
No.
Or for doing a good job.
I mean, but that too.
Yeah.
That too.
And I think we just need to stand our ground and stick with her because she is smart. She is there. She is a proven leader. And I just think she's a damn cool person.
Yeah. Are we giving any water to this argument that we need to elevate some of the young leadership of the Democratic Party?
No. I think...
No, go for it. Go for it.
Well, let me. I'm gonna hear you out.
Yeah.
I think that is... I think we need to keep some older members, not older members as an age, but
Seasoned, yeah.
time
Yeah.
in the House and time in the Senate, and that leadership. I think if we had someone that came in that was genuinely the most capable person and we wanted to elevate them up and to our leadership, then that's great. But I don't think this is the time for us to roll the dice on possibilities. I think we need to stick to what we know, and people that have consistently proven they know what they're doing, we need to keep them in charge because we've got to have a good game plan. And
Yeah.
I just think keep it to what it is. And that's, I'm roll a little more conservative in that kind of plan structure, but
Daviana, counterpoint.
I think we need to make room
'Kay.
for younger generations. I think people become comfortable and complacent because they've been there for so long that it's very hard to see change being made. And that goes back to my generational point about and that's a fair point, that's saying there's a generational gap within the party, and you are seeing the older people who've been here for a long time standing their shit like Nancy Pelosi does. But I think there comes a time and a place where turnover is going to happen.
Right.
And I think not necessarily do you need to give up these leadership positions, but I think there needs to be some mentoring happening. And I just see a lack in mentoring in general. And I think if that were to happen, then we'd get younger people and that really understand what they're getting themselves into and have expectations. And we're just not seeing that happening. So what I want to see is not necessarily like, let's get all the seasoned people out of here, but I think there just needs to be a lot more mentoring that's being done.
Yeah.
integrate it. I think that happens at the national level, and I think that needs to really happen in our state houses.
For sure.
We
For
need
sure.
to focus on those because we look at the House and the Senate and are like caught up in that, but that's where these
Local
people
government
come
matters.
from.
For
The
real.
people that we're electing to these national offices have been state senators, state representatives, and we need to start watching these people and seeing what they're doing on the most basic level. So we have great people to have step forward and put their names on the next ballot.
Absolutely. I think probably one of the best things to come from 2016, and we saw it in 2018, is people's political activation, to get involved in races, to run for stuff at every level, but also to support people, to support candidates at every level. And that includes these state houses. I don't know how many more people learned their local representatives' names out of this election. Probably not many, but I think bringing an awareness to it is definitely going to be worth a lot going forward. We've reached about the limit of our time here, so I just wanted to say thank you guys so much for being on the 36%. You know, we have a lot to look forward to in the coming 2 years from now to 2018 with the 225 to 200. We can stop some bad shit in the House. Maybe we can get over the gridlock and pass some bipartisan stuff, but odds are we're just going to have a lot of fun just cucking the Senate.
2020.
Exactly. Beto for 2020. That's what I'm saying. So, without further ado, I'm just going to go ahead and sign off because we already filmed an outroll, so you guys don't have to do that. So, once again, thank you guys so much for being here.
Thanks
Thank
for
you.
having us.
All right. Cool.
The 36% was founded, written, and directed by Adam Childers Arnold and Brett Combs.
Music in this episode is provided by Purple Planet. Go ahead and check them out at purple-planet.com.
The presenting sponsor of the 36% is Avian Apparel.
Our audio engineering is done, as always, by Burnt Crumbs.
Our ukulele muse, and shall it forever continue to be, Alum, California.
Cover art for this episode is done by Christian Ferguson.
Special thanks again to everyone that worked on 2018 campaigns, got your friends registered, and basically made this blue wave happen.
And thank you for tuning in to the 36%. I'm Brett,
And I'm Adam,
and this has been
the 36%.